Once upon a time, there was a speck of energy that wanted to manifest by acting on the things around it. And it can be seen as a thunderbolt up in the sky somewhere. And it shot down this lightning bolt of energy, like a cloud of energy, into the ground. You can picture like this dark landscape or something, or some very purple scene with lots of purple clouds and this sort of dim, stormy kind of light. And the lightning bolt, the thunderbolt, shocked down into the ground, and it realized there was a way of controlling matter and controlling energy in this universe, or in a universe, through acting on what was around it, but what it wasn't identifying as. So basically saying, I'm partitioning reality in a sense, and I'm one kind of a consciousness, and I'm going to act on something else that's a different consciousness altogether. And we're not really linked, or we're not really connected at that point. So that's why it's like a thunderbolt shooting out of the sky onto the ground and acting on something else. That was the first thunderbolt. And then some other thunderbolts came around and said, let's see what you're doing. Oh, that's really interesting. You have other bits of energy, other bits of consciousness that are way down below you, and you're shocking it and creating like a stimulus response and getting it to do things for you, getting it to perform for you, acting on it, so that you're actually independent of the thing you're acting on. Wow, that's super interesting. So other thunderbolts gathered around and started doing this. And eventually it became what you could call a thundercluster. And then the thundercluster kept spreading and spreading into a thunder world, or a thunder planet. And this became the thunder universe. And this is the universe that we're living in, that's basically based on a certain class of souls or beings having the manifesting power simply because they've devised a system in which they act on something else that they're not identifying with. Another word for this is duality, but I think the way I've described it, as I've received this information this way, is painting a whole new kind of a picture that is really important to grasp and wrap your mind around. So this thunder cluster, which has become a whole thunder universe, is now acting on these bits of consciousness that are outside of itself, that are way down there on the ground. I mean, it really helps to picture this if you're not picturing this already. You know, it really is like a layer of storm clouds way up here, and then consciousness or souls that are getting kind of acted upon way down there. And they're not connected, you know, they're not sharing a consciousness link in the parameters of this system, really, or they're not supposed to. And so then there's a few things we can learn from looking at it this way that are so important to understanding where we are here. One of them is that let's just look at the thunderclouds themselves, because normally people don't look at those. But the thunderclouds themselves, which have to do with the controlling energy and the energy of creating and provoking, creating through provoking others to do something, provoking others to feel something. Okay, that's the handler energy, the controller energy. The way that ultimately works is that these thunderbolt beings that have become a thunder cluster, they're actually almost, in a sense, linked in a hive. They're actually a lot more linked than the individual souls that are getting acted upon way down at the ground level. The souls at the top, in the cloud layer, the thunderbolts, they share much more the same energy, okay? Which is really interesting to consider as we move forward, because subconsciously what their biggest fear is basically is that the consciousness that they're acting upon on the ground would understand what's happening. And, well, they already do understand at a soul level if you want to go there, but their fear was that the consciousnesses that they're acting on would actually make a decision through multiple dimensions of understanding to kind of peace out and be done with this whole system and to collapse the game. If the souls at ground level were to collapse the game and start leaving and saying, okay, we're done with this universe, it served its purpose maybe, but we're not interested anymore, if those souls were to leave, then the thunderbolts at the top level would no longer have the energy they need and would no longer have anything to act upon. So they would be like looking down at the ground, trying to shock a being and produce a response in order to manifest, and they would say, shit, there's nothing down there for me to act on. When that happens, they start to have their own version of a kind of a soul panic, you could say, where they start freaking out. All of a sudden they have to look at each other and say, am I going to act on you? Am I going to act on you now? So the thunderbolts are now acting on each other at the top storm cloud level. That's the handler energy, the controller energy, the matrix energy basically turning against itself. When that happens, that's basically the beginning of the end to this universe, because these beings that really have only learned now how to exist and to manifest through acting on a different order of consciousness, now they're acting on their own order, on their own class. They try to shock the other members of this thundercluster, but it just devolves because they can't manifest through shocking each other, because all they know how to do is essentially take, although I'm avoiding using the word take because I want to get people to think of this as a different paradigm than giving and taking. We're thinking in terms of shocking and then being stimulated in order to get some kind of response. That's the level we're thinking on. So that's the issue from the standpoint of the thundercluster. They need souls at ground level to be there for them so they have something to shock and to act upon. That's the only way that they manifest. Okay? And so then the other super interesting thing is to look at it from the standpoint of other souls in the system who aren't handlers, who aren't controllers. I'm certainly not going to use the word victims because that's completely the wrong energy. It actually creates a false impression. But it's those who are entering into this system to be acted upon. Okay? Those souls, those bits of consciousness at the ground level. So those are the ones who are pretty much having their energy harnessed in order to create something that they aren't directing at all. It's being directed by the thunderclusters way at the top. Okay? And so for them, that's essentially the energy of, usually it starts out as higher dimensional beings, manifesting beings, or creative beings who are coming down and then getting pulled into the system. You could say they're tricked in order to be here, or they're trapped in order to be here. But at the end of the day, they are here. Okay? And maybe you could say they've decided to come here too. We're not going to get into all that. But they're here. And so these are beings who have a lot of innate manifesting or creative power, but they're actually, in effect, handing it over to the thunderclusters to be shocked over and over and over again. And the pattern of shocks, how it acts on them, all the way from physical 3D biological reality of producing literal chemicals in their brain to the different dimensional aspects of being shocked, which mean different aspects of their causal body or their, I'm forgetting what I'm looking for here, but other kinds of bodies, other kinds of manifesting powers in different dimensions are also getting shocked, as it were, and pulled into this grid. That's how it works for them, okay? There's one other class of being, though, and this is really, really important. And this is what I would call the sprites. This is not really talked about. These would be beings who have been here for relatively a lot less amount of time. One word for this is starseeds. Beings like this who you could say are, in their own minds, they're observing what's going on here, but they haven't committed to be here. They would be like, if you actually know what a sprite is in a thunderstorm, a sprite refers to an electrical charge that's way up, like usually miles above the main thundercloud layer. It's like way up in maybe the stratosphere, the troposphere, I'm not really sure, but it's in a higher level of the atmosphere. And I'll try to put a picture in if I figure out how to do that. And the sprites are way up above, and they actually look like kind of fairies or sprites. Oftentimes that's how they're described. So the sprites are way up there, but in the picture I'm painting, the sprites aren't 100% involved in this yet. The sprites certainly aren't thunderbolts who are creating a charge. And the sprites aren't also totally down at ground level being victimized or anything, or feeling like they're victimized. The sprites are way up above the entire game, and they're just kind of a soul that's in some sense watching, that's here but also not really here. And the sprite is first and foremost just fascinated about what's going on in this reality, okay? But then the sprite does something very interesting, because the sprite realizes that on a certain level, there's a trap to the way this all plays out, because it's such a dualistic system. Like I said, it's either you're in control as a thunderbolt, as a thundercluster, or you're being acted upon on the ground. And those are your really only options, which is why it's a dualistic system. And in a sense, it can become very limiting that way. And you can get kind of stuck here being either doing the shocking over and over again or getting shocked over and over again. And this can last essentially for eons. And so the sprites, who are just kind of starseeds, who are observing the way this all plays out, they're saying, do I actually want to get involved here? Or is this just kind of fascinating to watch? Because from a higher dimensional perspective, all kinds of things can be interesting to look at. It doesn't mean you want to move in. But then we get to the last step. And this is an energetic step that happens for the sprites at the top. And on some level, this energetic paradigm also plays out for the souls on ground level, although less for them, because these would be souls who have been here for so long that they're very much part of the duality system, and they're being harnessed and used as part of this manifestation grid, being shocked over and over. But for the sprites at the top, who haven't been here as long, something very interesting happens. They create systems for self-torture, which sounds pretty crazy. The reason that they manifest self-torture is because they reach a certain point where they start to freak out in their own way just a little bit. And they say, holy crap, I am kind of interested in this system. And it does kind of pique my curiosity, but I can't stay here. This place is nuts. Like, I don't know what it would look like for me to stay here, but it doesn't look good. And so what they do is they hurt themselves and they shock themselves because they start getting afraid of their own curiosity. The curiosity starts taking them at a soul level to want to actually commit more through the incarnation system or through the incarnation contracts. It starts to make them want to commit to being here more kind of as a long-term resident. Whereas before, they were just kind of a visitor for a few days, you might say, in a cosmic timescale. And they don't want to do that. And they're saying, holy crap, I can't stay here. But they're afraid of their own curiosity. They're afraid that it might get the better of them. So they start hurting themselves and they start manifesting systems that hurt themselves. Okay, now to very briefly make this a little more practical so you can envision it, this would be someone who ends up always getting into relationships that make them feel like shit. Always living in places, having jobs that they don't like. Always just feeling bad and having depression. Always just experiencing the dynamics of isolation. That's probably the biggest one of all. And it goes on and on. But when you experience some form of isolation, something that makes you feel alone, it makes you second guess your desire to be here. And on a soul level, it's like creating a reverse current. It's like creating a situation where the conscious mind is kind of reaffirming repeatedly back up through the dimensions to the higher bodies of the soul. It's basically saying, yeah, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. And what it does is it starts to create it creates a clause in your contract where it says, you're not going to be here much longer. You'd want to get out. You don't want to be here. Because essentially it becomes this feedback loop where you're afraid, your soul is afraid that you actually will elect to stay here. And that's a deeply freakish prospect because in this reality that's so dualistic, it's like your options both suck. I mean, to put it kind of bluntly, because either you're going to be a part of the thundercluster, which would equate to being a very regressive, controlling energy who doesn't necessarily create anything for itself, who just shocks. That's actually not 100% true. Oh gosh, I don't want to get into that. It's often said that kind of like the class of archontic or reptilian or regressive beings, they don't have any creative potential. I mean, that's true, but it's also, I would just say that they create through getting others to create. And so in that sense, you can say that they seem to have an overall architectural vision of what they're looking for. Actually, it's interesting to get into that, but not now. So that's your first choice. And your second choice is the beings that are basically being yoked up, harnessed like cattle and like livestock. And that's not an attractive prospect from a higher dimensional self, except the starseed energy of these sprites who are just watching from way up in the stratosphere. There's a part of them that says they just, these beings are so imbued with a kind of energy of magic and the energy of potential and infinity. And there can be almost an engineering quality to many of them, or a tinkerer quality of like, how can I build this and fashion this and make it? And there's a sense of like, wait a sec, there's something here that's really cool, even though it sucks. And it's like, I want to know how I can refashion this into something that's awesome. Or it's almost like looking at the layers of this thundercluster, thundercloud reality and saying, yeah, but there's something cool about it. And I want to know what I'm attracted to. And I can't figure out yet what I'm attracted to. So it becomes deeply entrancing and kind of like it lulls you into a sense of acquiescence. It lulls you into a desire to learn more, and so you want to stay and you want to stay. But then you shake yourself out of it and you're like, no, I can't stay here. This place sucks. This place is a trap. It's a trick. And the soul of the sprite is going through many of these movements, and a lot of them are actually quite complex because it's happening in a dimensional kind of trade-off. With the lower dimensional aspects, you're getting lulled in and wanting to experience the physicality and want to experience the physical body and wanting to experience the limitations, as actually paradoxically the limitations become a new aspect, a new level of infinity, because limitations itself can be part of infinity. There's your paradox, right? But then the higher dimensional aspects of the soul are saying, get out before it's too late, in some sense, or maybe other dimensional aspects that are even higher than that. See, that's why it becomes complex. You know, certain dimensional aspects are saying stay, certain dimensional aspects are saying go. Overall, this produces a certain kind of a internal conflict, which manifests itself for a need for paralysis. And if you want a way to paralyze yourself in this world, just torture yourself. Because the more pain you experience, the more it makes you want to do essentially nothing. You know, I mean, in the short run, you're going to try different extremes, and you're going to run over here, you're going to run over there, you're going to jump into relationships, you're going to move to different places, you're going to isolate yourself, you're going to meet people again, you're going to go crazy posting on social media, you're going to disappear, you're going to get a new job and try to succeed, you're going to go through extremes. But sooner or later, usually doesn't take very long, you experience enough of this kind of a soul torture, and you just want to get out and you want to quit. So this would be the third aspect of consciousness. So you have the thunderclusters at the top who are controlling things. You have the controlled souls who are basically the food, who are the cattle, who are at the ground level, who are pretty much being shocked and stimulated in order to, they're the sort of war horses, the workhorses of this world, of this universe, because they're basically doing all the work of giving their orgone in order for this system to be manifest. Then you have the sprites that are like, holy shit, what do I want to do? Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? They're way at the top. And this is what I got, and I think you guys should really think about this and try to visualize it, because it can cause some instantaneous realizations.